자세 하나가 뇌에 주는 영향은 생각보다 강력합니다. 무시당하지 않고 존중받는 사람이 되기 위한 4가지 바디랭귀지 트릭을 공개합니다.
Dr. Amy Cuddy, expert on the behavioral science of power.
The Harvard professor coined the term power pose.
The second most watched TED Talk of all time.
Our posture can affect some of the biggest moments of our lives.
Your body language is betraying you. 50% of our first impression is based around body language. So the way that we carry ourselves really affects your life. Because if people feel utterly powerless, they see challenges as threats instead of opportunities. They are less creative, less authentic. So that's my mission, to help people feel more powerful and become more socially brave. And there's all kinds of ways in which we can fix it.
Is there a relationship there as well between our body language and attractiveness?
Yeah, there's research showing that that body language is more effective both in the workplace and in dating situations. How we tell our stories to ourselves matters.
As I read through your story, there was bullying in your life.
It's the worst thing that ever happened to me. I had to leave my job after I'd worked so hard to get there. I almost decided to die. Like, I'm so afraid of them still.
불안한 감정은 몸에서 시작됩니다. 뇌를 속여서 자신감을 만드는 미세한 신체 조절법을 배워보죠.
Amy, there's lots of myths around body language and how important it is, and you hear all these phrases about 80% of our communication is non-verbal or 90%. I can't remember the numbers, but you hear all of this stuff. Is body language really that important?
Yes, it is important, absolutely, and it probably affects about half of our impression of others. Our first impression is based around body language. Maybe it's higher than that, but I would say it's at least 50%. Body language isn't just us speaking to others. We're also speaking to ourselves. The way that we carry ourselves is sending messages back to our brain about whether we're safe or unsafe. Are we threatened or not threatened? Are we, confident or not confident? And so,
how do we know that?
Well, the sort of earliest studies looking at this idea about body-mind feedback were focused on facial expressions. And so we know that there are some mostly universal expressions of emotion that are facial. And when I say mostly, there is some debate about, whether they're entirely universal to every single culture and exactly which emotions they are. But you have things like happiness and smiling, sadness and crying, widened eyes and surprise. Those things are universal regardless of where you grew up and what you were exposed to. So if they're universal, that indicates that they are hardwired, that we're born with some experimenter better. They like.
타인과 연결되려면 먼저 자신의 공간을 점유하세요. 당신의 자세가 상대의 반응을 결정합니다.
Anything put in front of them better. They felt happier than the people who were not in this forced smile. It was then expanded to look at some of these other universal facial expressions like crying and sadness. And then people started to look at things like movement, posture. I would say the earliest work really was on breathing. When we get anxious, we breathe quickly and shallowly. And if you think about, and I'm not sure that you ever had this experience, but if you were called on in class, say in high school, and you weren't prepared, or the first time you had to give a speech in front of class, a lot of students speak very quickly, and you can tell that their breathing is shallow and they're breathing quickly. That's a fight or flight response. And so, can you turn that around? And so the people who started studying this called this the relaxation response, where they got people to change their breathing. And I'm oversimplifying this, but in essence, you're breathing more slowly and deeply. And that triggers a nervous system response that makes people feel much more relaxed and more confident and safe.
Which impacts performance of their speech, whatever they're doing.
Yes, or the context in which it was first studied was medicine, and trying to get patients to feel calmer before stressful procedures. Herb Benson at Harvard Medical School did some of that early work, I think, going back to the 60s and 70s. That was, but it wasn't sort of linked quite to psychology because it was coming from medicine. When you have a person who is suffering from major depressive disorder, open their posture just for a couple of minutes, and then have them fill out a depression scale afterwards, they are less depressed. When you treat people with PTSD, by teaching them, yoga poses that open them up, it reduces their PTSD symptoms. So this is coming from all different fields of study, not just from social psychology. What you want to be shown.
상대방과 보폭을 맞추는 거울 효과는 리더십의 기본입니다. 관계를 주도하는 상호작용의 비밀입니다.
Is I'm comfortable, I'm relaxed with you, I'm interested in you.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the posture that you want to take on, and people will mirror that. One thing that in general, people mirror each other's body language, right? That's a way that we sync up. But there's one exception, and that's when there's a power differential. So if a powerful person is interacting with somebody that's clearly less powerful, the powerful person tends to become more dominant in their body language, and the powerless person becomes more powerless. And we call that complementarity. So I think it's very important for people in leadership positions to be aware that when one of their, employees comes to talk to them, they're probably a little nervous, and to be very mindful of their body language, because you don't want them to shut down. You want them to feel comfortable and tell you what's going on, share their interest or their problem or their challenge.
Penguin arms. I never heard that expression until chapter 9 of your book. What's penguin arms?
It's when people don't know what to do with their hand. A lot of people don't know what to do with their hands when they're speaking.
Yeah.
And so they kind of pin their wrists to their, around their hips, and their hands kind of stick out.
Oh, okay. Got you.
You sort of look like a penguin. Yeah, it's really common for people who are afraid of public speaking. They're kind of moving their hands, but they're afraid to move their arms away from their body. So that's penguin arms.
Let me just I've got this correctly. Is this penguin arms? You mean this?
Yeah.
So if I'm doing public talk and I'm like...
Yeah, exactly. That's penguin arms.
Okay. And it's again because one of there's correlation between how much space you take up and how powerful you feel, right? That's me trying to take up as little space as possible.
Right.
And I'm signaling, so I'm speaking to you by doing.
About in the TED Talk.
연기가 아닙니다. 당신의 몸을 바꾸면 정체성도 따라옵니다. 오늘 배운 트릭으로 삶을 설계하세요.
Who had not participated at all the whole semester, and I was going to have to fail her, and I said, you have to participate. And she finally raised her hand in the last class. I said, I'll call on you. And first of all, her comment was amazing, and people's heads spun, like they hadn't noticed her. But she continued to use these ideas, and she came back to me later, 6 months or a year later, and she said to me, I want you to know I'm so happy now. Because she had come into my office and said, I feel like an imposter. I don't belong here. I'm from this small town. I was like, so am I. If I belong here, you do. She came back to me after graduating and finding and actually getting into education and not business. And she said, those things that we talked about, I did. And I realized I wasn't faking it till I made it. I was faking it till I became it. And now I'm the person that I wanted to be.
That makes so much sense. So expand yourself